But with that, as we're approaching kind of the 5 minute mark past the hour, I'm really happy to get this event going. So, hello everybody, and thank you for sending the De-siloing Existential Threats Policy Cycle Phase 2 report launch event. So my name is Declan Penrose, and I'm a policy fellow at BASIC working on the Emerging Voices Network. So I'll quickly start by introducing you to the Emerging Voices Network, or the EVN for short. So the EVN is a digital global network of high potential early career researchers on nuclear weapons and nuclear policy issues. Every year we offer policy cycles to our members where they can collaborate on a project together, which culminates in a report with policy recommendations from the EVN members themselves. So the EVN is also currently accepting new members until the 30th of September, and I will soon be posting a link to sign up or renew your membership if you're a current member in the chat. So over the last year, the EVN De-siloing Existential Threats Policy Cycle was the second phase of a set of policy cycles focused on de-siloing the nuclear field. And in particular, this year, we focused on investigating the interconnections between different existential threats. So we had 28 EVN members in total in 4 different focus groups comprising of 7 members, and they participated in 5 workshops which looked at the interconnections between existential threats, using futures and foresight methodologies, mapping threats using the program KUMU, and developing their findings into policy recommendations. Their final notes and recommendations from these workshops were then used by the EVN team to write a final report. So this is the part, this event is launching the report, which I'll also be linking in the chat very soon. So this policy cycle was once again made possible by the generous support of the Ploughshares Fund, who have also supported the upcoming phase 3 of the policy cycle, which will be conducted over the next year. So to kick off the launch event, I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker for today, the Ploughshares Director of Programs, Dr. Sara Kutchesfahani. So Sara has close to 20 years of professional and academic experience in the fields of nuclear proliferation and nuclear security, and was previously the director of the N-Squared DC Hub. She has a PhD in political science from University College London and is the author of Global Nuclear Order and Politics and the Bomb, the Role of Experts in the Creation of the Cooperative Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreements, as well as numerous other scholarly and policy arguments. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Sara for the keynote speech.
Thank you so much, Declan. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. Given that we're all in different time zones, I'll say good morning. That's where I am. Good afternoon. That's where you are, Declan. Good evening. That's where some of you are as well. So greetings to all of you. As Declan said, my name is Sara Kutchesfahani, and I'm the program director at Ploughshares, and I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. Now, my job entails managing our foundation's grant-making budget and leading a team of 3 exceptional program officers and associates. Let me just say a few words about the relationship between Ploughshares and BASIC before we move on to the excellent report we are all here to discuss. As some of you may already know, Ploughshares is a public foundation based here in the US. We have offices in San Francisco and here in Washington, D.C. As a public foundation, we have to raise the money in order to spend it through our grant making. And as the largest foundation singularly focused on reducing the dangers posed by nuclear weapons, we grow and amplify the impact of the most effective advocates and organizations in the world, like BASIC, through critical funding and trusted field-building support. Specifically, we fund organizations and people who drive policies and activities that help eliminate nuclear threats or address regional conflicts, create a stronger and more resilient nuclear risk reduction field, build new partnership with intersecting issues, and support transformational thinking and activity. Does that sound familiar? I hope so, because a lot of what I just said is covered through the excellent work of BASIC, in particular the EVN, the Emerging Voices Network. Now, our funding relationship with BASIC goes way, way back. And if I'm not mistaken, the first grant we made to BASIC was back in 1988. More recently, though, since 2022, when we held our Equity Rises request for proposals, which I'm going to get into in a second, we have been funding their EVN-related work, which we are really proud to support. Now, for context, we held our Equity Rises request for proposals in 2022 because we realized we were at an inflection point regarding nuclear policy, and we needed to lead the nuclear field into its next phase, which meant challenging assumptions, challenging status quo thinking, building power with allies, and catalyzing diversity and inclusion within the nuclear field, also at Ploughshares, through what we called Equity Rises. We believed then, as we believe now, that equity rises as a fundamental driver of change in the nuclear policy field in the coming years. In short, Equity Rises aims to increase equity and justice in nuclear policy by empowering these diverse voices, cultivating inclusive spaces, and collaborating with new partners inside and outside the field. Programmatically, Equity Rises serves as a core structural component of the Ploughshares mission to eliminate the threat of nuclear weapons by expanding its scope of inclusivity to gender, race, and disability. Equity Rises as a concept, as a framework, as a value, continues to disrupt assumptions on how and who has a say in the matter of making the world a more insecure world for everybody. And Basics EVN was one such recipient of the 16 grants we awarded under this program. And we are thrilled to be able to continue to support the crucial and important work BASIC leads, especially in relation to the EVN. Now, what stands out to me when thinking about the EVN is that this is truly an intentional effort to build a global network of new voices, expanding beyond Europe and the US, making it truly global and truly reflective of the entire world and capturing the perspectives of more than the usual suspects. BASIC and the network are to be commended in this endeavor, given the steady increase of its membership over the years. So thank you for all the hard work you do here. It is as much needed as it is greatly appreciated. The work of the EVN is very closely aligned with our mission, given the new and novel approaches you all are taking when it comes to the nuclear issue. More recently, and Declan, you alluded to this, your work has expanded into the futures thinking and scenario planning domains, which is clearly reflected in the excellent report we are here to discuss today. Now, what I enjoyed about the report, yes, I did read it more than once, but what I really did enjoy about the report was honestly pretty much everything. The timeliness, the importance, the focus, it's really a gift. And I even really love the title. Yes, I'm that much of an academic that I read everything cover to cover, but I found reading the title, after every single word, I was just nodding because I was like, yes, these are all the right words to be using. You know, de-siloing, absolutely. We can't just focus on nuclear weapons in a vacuum. Existential threats, of course it's an existential threat. Interconnections, such an important yet underexplored facet to the nuclear conundrum. The more we can tease out the interconnections, the more we can get more people engaged and activated. I don't think I need to tell anyone in this audience right now that nuclear issues pretty much affects almost any other political or social issue. So challenge your friends, challenge your families, your co-workers, your neighbors to bring to you the social or political issue that they are most interested in, and you help them find that nuclear link because it is there. And the more we do that, the better. Because at the end of the day, we all have a role to play in this nuclear story. And then, of course, back to the title itself, the world global is obviously super, super important. We have to stop thinking that this is simply a US issue or a UK issue, or quite frankly, a nuclear weapon state only issue. This is an issue that affects each and every one of us, irrespective of where we live in the world. The conception of the bomb, starting with the Manhattan Project, as you may know, was a scientific and military endeavor that was led by and paid for by the US. And it brought together an international group of scientists to work on the scientific discovery of what might happen if an atom were to be split. And I think you all know what happens when an atom is split. But what I want to highlight here from when we go way, way back to the inception of the bomb itself is the global, the international nature of this project. There were scientists from all over the world participating in this project. You had scientists from the US, from the UK, from France, from Germany, from China, from Italy, from Hungary. I could keep going, but it was a truly global project. And why it's important to emphasize this is because it speaks to the nature of the truly global problem. This was a global science project that still has global security implications 79 plus years later. And so we should not forget the global nature of the nuclear weapon issue. As I said, it was very much a global project and it continues to pose a global threat. And I think by thinking through this international lens, conceptualizing and truly understanding what security means to everybody and not just to the nuclear weapon states, and teasing out those interconnections that I briefly touched upon, that nuclear weapons pretty much enjoys with all other competing policy issues, we may push the needle on getting closer to a world without nuclear weapons. So with that, I want to say thank you for your attention. I want to say thank you for this incredible report that you've given. And now I get to sit back and listen and enjoy the conversation. So back to you, Declan, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sara, for an incredible keynote speech. That was excellent and really informative. And as always, it's a pleasure for Basic to continue working with the Ploughshares Fund and all the important work Ploughshares does, and all of the field building with all of the other great organisations that Ploughshares works with as well. It's a real privilege for us. So thank you very much. And with that, I will hand over to our excellent EVN members for this. It was a real pleasure to work on this policy cycle with them. And again, we are very grateful for the continued support of our EVN members and the Ploughshares Fund. So now I'll hand over to members of each working group to discuss their work together on the policy cycle and the policy recommendations they created together. So after their presentations, there will be an opportunity to ask the policy cycle members questions, so please submit them through the question and answer function. So starting us off, representing Focus Group 1, we have Nivedita S. So Nivi is a research fellow at the Centre for International Law at the National University of Singapore, and focuses specifically on nuclear law. So Nivi, I'll hand it over to you if you're ready, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. As Declan mentioned, I'm Nivi, and it is really my privilege here to represent my focus group today as I share more about our work in this policy cycle. At the outset, on behalf of my focus group, a very big thank you to Basic EVN team for a wonderful policy cycle, Ploughshares for enabling this policy cycle, and of course, Declan for drafting the final report. Our focus group's work is entitled Mapping Interdependencies, a stakeholder atlas for the existential threat nexus, building gaps, unveiling disproportionate impacts, and illuminating underrepresented communities. To start with, here are some of our group's considerations throughout the policy cycle. At the outset, our focus group recognized that more needs to be done in relation to interlinkages as between existential threats, and not just in terms of research, but also education and policymaking. We also realized that stakeholders play a very important part and that there is a need to actually identify all relevant stakeholders, particularly when dealing with existential threats, and in light of the interlinkages as between these threats, those impacted by these interlinkages will especially need to be identified and considered. These stakeholders are the ones who should ultimately be the beneficiaries of any potential policy recommendation. In light of the different workshops we attended as part of the policy cycle, we also considered what role can the different methodologies we learned play, such as the futures and foresight methodologies, as well as the mapping methodologies. We also noted that there is a need for transparency and accessibility in this area. Our policy recommendations can be categorized into 4 distinct themes: research, collaboration and inclusive, meaningful participation of communities simultaneously impacted by different existential threats, education, transparency, and accessibility. These recommendations were targeted at different groups of stakeholders, such as the research community, policymakers, as well as the civil society. Here are some of the key themes that we sought to incorporate as part of our policy recommendations. We recommended that the futures and foresight methodologies be integrated not just into research, but also into policy planning. We should integrate forecasting and foresight as essential methodologies and processes in our efforts to effectively understand and mitigate existential threats. We should incorporate foresight exercises into regional, national, and multilateral strategic planning processes. We should also integrate foresight findings and recommendations into policy development and implementation frameworks. We also recommended the incorporation of mapping methodologies to reveal the complex web of stakeholders that are impacted by interlinking existential threats. We encouraged interdisciplinary collaboration on the research side, but at the same time also encourage cross-sectoral collaboration and knowledge sharing as between policymakers in different fields. There should be further research on interlinkages between nuclear policy and other fields, such as nuclear science, political science, environmental studies, public health, and economics, and the list goes on. Interdisciplinary research here should also involve marginalized communities. We should foster interdisciplinary collaboration among experts from different fields, developing integrated risk assessment frameworks that consider the social, economic, environmental, and geopolitical dimensions of nuclear weapons policy decisions, establish joint projects or initiatives on horizontal interlinkages as between nuclear and other fields, should also adopt an intersectional approach that acknowledges the interconnected nature of social, economic, and environmental injustices faced by marginalized communities and include their perspective in future research and policy recommendations. We also recommended conducting network mapping to identify all relevant communities, actors, and stakeholders, and establish collaborative and participatory processes to best include their perspectives. And these could take the form of consultations, town hall meetings, or establishing community advisory boards, etc. And these recognized stakeholders should also include those not typically identified, such as those communities affected by multiple existential threats and stakeholders not currently present in established hierarchies. We also encourage the fostering of capacity building efforts at the local level, empowering leadership, advocacy skills, and scientific literacy in order for these communities to advocate for their rights and interests effectively. We recommended that there be targeted and tailored education initiatives, and they should be targeted at different groups, such as the general public, communities in remote areas, policymakers in different fields, specialized groups such as youth, women, indigenous communities. And these initiatives should be accessible and specialized and tailored for these different groups for maximum impact and accessibility. They should also ensure that such initiatives include a train-the-trainer component so that these initiatives can empower stakeholders and be sustained and amplified. There should also be disarmament educational initiatives that focus on relationships with other educational spheres, such as climate education and human rights education. It should be ensured that such education initiatives involve not just the research community, but also civil society. We emphasize the need for research to be disseminated at all levels and across the fields. This means efforts need to be made to widely disseminate research findings, not just to policymakers in the nuclear field, but to all the relevant fields and stakeholders we have identified. We should support the dissemination of research to officials, policymakers outside the nuclear domain, and open up different platforms to share these findings. We also urge allowing affected communities and the research community access to nuclear archives by committing to transparency and openness. States should support the translation of such nuclear archives to make them accessible to different stakeholders, including those in diverse policy fields. Ultimately, we highly stress and recognize the strong need to facilitate funding for research and education initiatives. Pooling resources, particularly across different communities in other fields, would be beneficial, particularly since, after all, we are studying interlinkages here. And in this regard, the research community should look for various funding sources outside their usual domains. Policymakers should allocate funding and resources for research and capacity building, even in methodologies such as the field of forecasting and foresight. So that, I hope, give you a little snapshot of our policy recommendations. I encourage you all to read the report for the detailed recommendation, as well as the findings and recommendations of the other groups. We hope this inspires further work in mapping interdependencies. And it just so happens that we've just had the UN Summit of the Future, where the Pact for the Future was adopted, and is very apt. And I just want to read two relevant paragraphs here, where they recognize that we are at a time of profound global transformation, confronted by rising catastrophic and existential risks, and fellow human beings enduring terrible suffering, and we do need to change course. Otherwise, we risk tipping into a future of persistent crisis and breakdown. And in this regard, we reaffirm our pledge to reinvigorate global action to ensure the future we want and to effectively respond to current and future challenges in partnership with all relevant stakeholders. As Robert Frost said, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. We sincerely hope that this work continues. Thank you very much.
That was an excellent way to end it, Nivi. Thank you very much. That was a brilliant presentation, and thank you again for yours and Focus Group One's efforts. That, as you can see, they had an excellent and really broad set of policy recommendations throughout the whole policy cycle. So just wanted to reiterate how impressed I was with your group, and also again with your presentation. So next we have Ian Fleming-Joe, Sara Z, and Ellen Bergner from representing Focus Group 2. So Ian is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. His thesis evaluates the use of economic sanctions and denuclearization efforts of North Korea's nuclear program. He's also an Arms Control Negotiation Academy Research Fellow and former CTBTO and CENESS Research Fellow. Sara is a research candidate at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies in Islamabad, and Ellen is an open source analyst researching nuclear risk reduction with a focus on the Korea's non-traditional security and disinformation at the Open Nuclear Network. So with introductions out the way, I'll now hand it over to Focus Group 2.
Thank you so much, Stefan. First of all, it was an honor to work on this policy cycle. We thank BASIC and Ploughshares for this amazing initiative. Okay, since three of us will be presenting, our major areas include artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So I'll be covering the artificial intelligence part on behalf of my group. So the major findings of our group is that if we analyze the current trends, we see the disruptive nature of technologies. If we just look back at the recent events of the pager incident in Lebanon, we can get this is the manifestation of the lethal impacts of technology. And when we talk about artificial intelligence and the future of artificial intelligence, we see considerably more integration of AI in different aspects of military, be it autonomous weapons or be it ISR. So keeping in mind this fact, we believe that there is the lack of regulations of the technology is a major existential crisis, which requires due attention from the concerned stakeholders. So we see that the European Union, they adopted a comprehensive AI Act. We see China and USA each working separately on the regulations, but generally there is an absence of an international agreement that can regulate this technology, which has again a dual nature and has considerable amount of uncertainty associated with it. So one of our basic recommendation was that if we see to the year 2045, there is a dire need to establish a global legal framework. And yes, there are challenges associated with that because currently not all states are working towards that end, and again there is somewhat an absence of global consensus. But we advocated for the collaboration of concerned stakeholders, including the tech giants, the private companies, the private sector, states, and international organizations towards this cause. The collaborations needs to be top up and should follow a both top up and bottom up approach to materialize concrete results. Additionally, we also advocated for the increased role of United Nations Security Councils towards this end. Again, this also opens a new debate that how effective the United Nations Security Council can be in the course towards a global legal framework. But again, that is something to be debated upon, to be explored further, and to see what kind of frameworks could be adopted, what out-of-box solutions could we find to towards this and towards regulation of the technology in future, given the inherent risks that are associated with the technology. Again, we also, and there is also one thing that we wanted to highlight, that there is something that just a minute, I could to have better audio, I'll turn it on. Extremely sorry for that. I hope it's better now. Okay. And we also advocated for the transparency and adversarial machine learning. So we advocated that in parallel to advancements in artificial intelligence, there should be equal in studies and research in adversarial machine learning to enhance explainability of training data and machine learning models to foster trust and accountability in the field. And also we see that there is, as you know, a tech divide which can be observed. So with the with the technology being limited to certain groups, you see that the aspect of globalization is decreasing, and you can say that technology is leading towards more localization. Those tech giants that have access to the technology are actually having a lot of control on how to go about it. And given the geopolitical dynamics right now, it is actually will have a considerable impact in the future. So, and the last thing that we wanted to advocate was that to consider the human aspect, that how much human involvement is necessary. I think there is a considerable agreement that keeping human in the loop is an absolute necessity. There was an agreement that considering nuclear weapons, we do not see that that artificial intelligence would be integrated in the nuclear command and control by 2045. But still, given the inherent risk and the uncertain nature, there is a dire need to keep in mind that there needs to be we always need to keep human oversight in this aspect. So these were some of the major takeaways regarding artificial intelligence. I will now pass it on to my focus group colleague Ian Fleming to take it off from here. Over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Shaza. So we also touched on the intersection of nuclear security and cyber threats. It's becoming increasingly significant, especially as the adoption of AI and emerging technologies in nuclear weapon systems continue to evolve. Our working group explored how these cyber vulnerabilities could impact nuclear decision-making, particularly looking ahead to scenarios in 2045. We identified 3 key findings. The first one was the rising number of cyber threats. There's been a noticeable trend in cyber attacks targeting nuclear facilities and related infrastructure, exemplified by incidents like the Sellafield nuclear site breach by groups linked to Russia in China, and the hack of the National Nuclear Security Administration in the United States. These breaches demonstrate that even the most secure nuclear systems are vulnerable, raising alarm among policymakers about the potential consequences of such cyber intrusions. The second finding was on implications for nuclear decision-making. So with the integration of AI in nuclear weapon systems, although aimed at enhancing capabilities, it also introduces new risks, particularly when these systems rely on interconnected networks susceptible to cyber attacks. So such vulnerabilities could lead to unauthorized access data manipulation, or even disruptions that could escalate conflicts unintentionally. Last but not least, there is a need for enhanced cybersecurity. Given the central role of cyber infrastructure in nuclear security, it is essential to adopt stringent cybersecurity measures to protect these systems from exploitation by malicious actors. Our recommendations on the nuclear cybersecurity nexus are threefold. Firstly, we need to strengthen cybersecurity infrastructure. States should prioritize the development of advanced cybersecurity frameworks, incorporating threat detection systems and secure communication channels to safeguard nuclear assets. Secondly, we should promote international cooperation. Collaboration at the international level is crucial. We recommend establishing global information sharing mechanisms to respond collectively to cyber threats, thereby enhancing global cyber resilience. And the last recommendation is accountability and legislation. It's also vital to hold states accountable for cyber activities that target nuclear infrastructures and to update domestic and international legislation to address these evolving threats effectively. Cybersecurity in the nuclear domain will remain a critical concern for decades to come. Our recommendations aim to build a more resilient and secure future where the risks of nuclear escalation due to cyber interference are significantly minimized. I'll pass it on to my colleague, Elaine.
Thank you, Shaz and Ian. Now I wanted to bring up another interrelated topic discussed by our group, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion in the nuclear field and policymaking. So while we have seen improvements in the last few years, there is still a huge discrepancy in numbers, with women representing only a fifth of the global nuclear workforce, a number that decreases further in the nuclear security force, but also in the other intersecting areas discussed here today, AI and cyber. And yet, as we know, decisions on nuclear energy and nuclear weapons affect also women, who make up half of the world's population, and it does so in sometimes differential ways, both biologically and societally. The issues should also be understood both vertically and horizontally. While numbers of women participation is increasing, it doesn't always correlate with an increase in women in senior roles with decision-making power, which must also be addressed. Now, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion includes many more aspects than just women's participation, much more than we have time to mention here today. But another one we wanted to highlight today is the importance of the inclusion of Indigenous voices and rights in nuclear discussions, with a particular focus on those directly impacted by uranium mining. So during the cycle, we discussed a case study in which a country responded to serious environmental and societal concerns voiced by Indigenous communities and others by banning uranium mining in that country, only to import uranium from other countries in which uranium mining is causing significant negative impact on their local Indigenous communities, effectively just outsourcing the issue. So this disconnect here of treating these issues as the responsibility of individual nations, we think is an accurate reflection of the overall issues that we've discussed throughout the policy cycle, including nuclear, AI, and cyber, but also other existential threats such as climate change. Ultimately, no country, no organization, or any single department can ever adequately address these intersecting issues by themselves. So our final recommendations touches upon this, that there is a pressing need to develop integrated approaches to interrelated existential risks. We provided some specific ways to do so, for example, by taking inspiration from the UN's internal coordination mechanism. And it's equally important to ensure funding for interdisciplinary research on existential threats, including to ensure accessible and sustainable funding streams for long-term multidisciplinary research, which will require some restructuring in the way in which governments and IOs and NGOs conduct their work. And we are, of course, seeing some progress towards this, obviously well represented by the work of BASIC, this policy cycle, and the generous funding from Ploughshares that enables this research. But of course, more work needs to be done if you wish to tackle the multiple intersecting existential threats discussed here today in an inclusive and equitable way. So thank you from Working Group 2. Thank you very much, Declan and BASIC, for the report and this launch event. Thank you, Sara and Ploughshares, for enabling this. And I hope you all enjoy the report. I also hope we will have the opportunity to continue this important work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Focus Group 2. And I think that was, again, a really great note to end on, talking about the working beyond the nuclear field and it working with other fields. And of course, I'm delighted to say that there will be another phase of this policy cycle over the next year, which Ploughshares will continue to be involved in. And I hope to see several of the current members of Policy Cycle continue to work on it. So yes, thank you very much for another excellent set of recommendations, and again, broadening out our scopes and focusing particularly on emerging technologies. So for the next group, we now have Focus Group 3. So they're represented by Fatima Fazel and Halima Saida from their focus group. So Fatima is a graduate professional in the Middle East WMD Free Zone project at UNIDIA, and is a graduate in Master of Public International Law. Halima is a PhD candidate at NUST and has a South Asia visiting and was a South Asia visiting fellow in 2023 at the Stimson Center. So with the introductions out of the way, I will hand over to Focus Group 3.
Okay, thank you so much, Declan. And I want to also thank you all the participants for participating in this launch event, and also want to thank the organizer for providing us with the opportunity to work on this report. And I want to use this opportunity to thank my teammates for their support and dedication to make this teamwork happen. So the theme of our focus group is the nuclear climate nexus, the intersection of climate change and nuclear weapons. In order to clarify the subject of our focus group, we divided this intersection. We divided this subject into different sections, and in each section we deal with the different impacts that the intersection of climate change and nuclear weapons could have. So we pose several questions for each section, and then we assign our team members to answer those questions. And the answer to this question constitutes the main body of our report. If you have read our report, you can see that you can see that these questions are all reflected in our report, and then we and then the recommendation that our team members come up are all based on this on the answers of these questions. So I will start off by the first question. So the first question is, how do nuclear armed states view climate change as a security threat? So we find out that nuclear weapon states don't share the same response towards climate change. While some of the states like the US, France, UK, Pakistan, and mostly NATO states see climate change as an existential threat, the other countries are not associating themselves with this approach. For example, China regards climate change as mainly as an economic and development issue, and China is also critical of the views that try to tip the balance in favor of those views that try to see climate change from security lens. Next slide, please. So the second question is, climate change may exacerbate resource scarcity. How does this intersect with nuclear risk? So right now, we are witnessing that in different parts of the world, some countries in some regions, they are competing with each other over the sources, especially the water sources. So imagine that if one of the countries be in possession of nuclear weapons, it can pile on the agony. For example, if those countries go into war, if one of them is in possession of nuclear weapon, there might be some situation that's called for the deployment of nuclear weapon, and it can exacerbate the situation. Next slide, please. So the third question was, given the importance of clean energy for climate goals, how the role of nuclear energy might be reconsidered. We can see that all around the world, countries are struggling to find a sustainable source of energy which is less harmful to the environment. And this regard, it is scientifically approved that nuclear energy can be used as a green energy that is less harmful to the environment, and it can generate a huge amount of energy. So countries may want to see it as one of the strategies for their source of energies. And next slide, please. So the first question was how inclusive decision-making on nuclear and climate policies can be ensured, taking into account the concerns and perspectives of all nations, particularly in third worlds. We find out that third world countries or developing countries are always complaining that our rules or achievements and also our perspectives are being constantly ignored by the developed countries and pushed to the margin. For example, we have concerns over the issue that the nuclear weapon states should be held responsible for the global harms that can be caused by nuclear conflicts, but they don't pay attention to our concern to our demands. And if you want to reach a sustainable solution, then this solution should include our voices and our concerns. Next slide, please. So the last question that we dealt with was how the intersection of these two threats, nuclear weapons and climate change, can bring on humanitarian impacts. We realized that the humanitarian impacts that can cause by this intersection is actually the result of the effect that nuclear weapons can have on climate conditions. Imagine that upon a nuclear test or upon a nuclear detonation, we will witness a huge release of radioactive substances that they can be that they can have a grievous impact on environment, and that it can lead to health risk, and it can make uninhabitable areas and also widespread famine and drought. Next slide, please. So here I will stop and pass the floor to my teammate Halima Sadia to brief you on the policy recommendation that we have proposed during this policy cycle. Thank you so much. Halima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Fatma. And I think that's an excellent overview of our discussions. Declan, if you can show the Kumu map, that's on the next slide. Yeah. So, all the points that we discussed during our discussions, we thought that it would be better to kind of show them through a Kumu map, which kind of, shows the intersection of nuclear weapons with climate change. And then also all the 5 areas that Fatma has covered in her presentation, which relate to the security risks related to nuclear weapons, also the issue of resource competition that is a very, a kind of a point that is a factor in case of understanding the security risk related to nuclear weapons, and climate change, that's resource competition. And then when we think of nuclear weapons or nuclear issues per se, it's not just the destructive potential of nuclear weapons. Rather, we also have to think of the flip side as well. That is how nuclear technology can play a role in perhaps addressing the issue of climate change. So nuclear energy is a key point here. And that relates to the issue of whether all countries in the world have access to these technologies or not. And there, you bring in the issue of a global south. And then, although it doesn't really figure out that much in our focus group report, but we did discuss about access to peaceful nuclear technologies during our discussions. So with that, I will move on to the specific recommendations that our group came up with. So like I said before, these recommendations relate to the link between nuclear weapons and climate change. And these recommendations are designed to foster increase collaboration and between stakeholders, and also to embrace new innovative approaches and methodologies to address the issue of climate change. And the pretext of these recommendations is that we believe that climate change is not just a threat multiplier for nuclear war. It impacts all other existential threats, and we need to recognize this if we are to produce effective regulation, or perhaps do some kind of policy work in this regard. So we have 4 sets of recommendations, and I'll just quickly talk about them. First, it relates to the issue of climate nuclear nexus, and we encourage states to protect critical infrastructure and populations from climate disasters through measures such as establishing an international climate disaster response force, and also a funding mechanism for emergency aid. Secondly, here we talk about establishing binding international agreements to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and also transitioning to renewable energy sources to mitigate climate change risks. The second set of recommendations relates to innovating existential risk policymaking, and we encourage states to develop best practices, foresight tools, and simulation exercises to anticipate better and manage climate security risk across national, regional, and international contexts. We also recognize that climate-related issues such as future resource competition do not fundamentally change the international system, but dictate future arenas. So managing this issue does not necessarily require reinventing established tools, but implementing risk reduction and management effectively amidst changing balances of power that needs to be explored further. A third set of recommendations relates to enhancing nuclear security and safeguards, and we encourage states to establish and strengthen regulatory frameworks to foster rigorous oversight of nuclear safeguards and security, including regulatory agencies for monitoring and enforcement activities. We also encourage states to pursue transparency in their nuclear policies and decisions, and inform the public about the sources and motives of such policies and decisions. Our last set of recommendations relates to nuclear disarmament, where we encourage states to strengthen international cooperation and collaboration on nuclear disarmament, nuclear risk reduction, and climate change mitigation by leveraging existing multilateral forums and diplomatic channels. Lastly, we encourage the Global South states to form alliances based on shared interests to amplify their voices and influence policy outcomes. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and it's over to you, Declan.
That was great. Thank you very much, Halima and Fatemeh. That's another excellent presentation. And I think something that really strikes me as we go through the presentations, and it struck me throughout the policy cycle, is we gave everybody the same set of instructions at the beginning, and the same trainings, and every workshop people came back with totally different subjects, totally different perspectives, which shows how broad not only this topic is, but also the expertise amongst the members are. So yeah, I'm really impressed with all of the different recommendations again that have come out, and all the different topics that we've had throughout. So with that, thank you very much, Focus Group 3. I'll now be handing it over. So lastly, we have Itfa Kürşit and Johannes Nordin representing Focus Group 4. So Itfa is an IAEA fellow with more than 5 years of experience in research on nuclear issues and emerging technologies. And Johannes is a junior research fellow at the Institute for Security and Development Policies Asia program, and focuses on geopolitical developments in Eurasia and the Indo-Pacific. So now the introductions are again done, I will hand over to our final focus group, Focus Group 4.
All right, let's see. Can you all see my presentation now? Okay, perfect. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Special thanks to Declan, Sara, and the Ploughshares Fund also, of course, for making this possible, and to our valued team members that could not tune in with us today. Somewhat similar to Focus Group 3, in Focus Group 4, we have also looked at the nuclear climate nexus. However, we have narrowed in specifically on the interconnected threats and challenges posed by nuclear energy expansion, as well as climate change. So let us first begin with some context on how we actually arrived at this topic. It took us about 2 sessions before we narrowed in on this chosen theme, nuclear energy and climate change. And this came right after we had spent a workshop exploring the Horizon 2045 existential risks radar that had at the time recently been launched by N Squared and the Nuclear Threat Initiative. This radar had several links to nuclear security that was of relevance to our group, but there was one that stood out in particular. Can climate targets be achieved without increasing nuclear proliferation threats? So this question highlighted something pretty important, namely the tension between combating climate change on the one hand and the nuclear security regime on the other. And it got us thinking, because only a few weeks earlier, during the first EVN workshop in December 2023, something significant had happened at the then still ongoing COP28 summit. 22 states had signed on to a declaration to triple nuclear energy capacity worldwide between 2020 and 2050. And this came after the COP28 global stocktake for the first time had included a paragraph that listed nuclear energy among the zero and low emission technologies that were quote unquote needed to achieve deep, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So nuclear energy was effectively being given a new lease on life to speed up the climate transition. And if realized, this buildup would then entail a massive nuclear expansion. Today, there are already 440 operational reactors across 32 states, with an additional 60 under construction and another 110 in planning. So what will this mean then for global non-proliferation efforts, supply chain security, social and environmental concerns, and nuclear educational opportunities? These are some of the themes that we set out to explore. And we shall now move on to some of the risks that we identified before we finally list our policy recommendations at the end. A central finding of our investigation was that nuclear and environmental climate change risks, they are ultimately very intertwined. They influence each other in new ways, and they also amplify and interact with other existing threats. For instance, climate change demands greater resilience from our energy systems. As last illustrated during the Fukushima accident, nuclear power plants must be prepared to withstand increasingly severe natural disasters. And this is especially so when, in the future, the next generation of power plants are expected to come in greater numbers, in smaller sizes, and also more widely geographically dispersed. At the same time, a massive scale-up of nuclear energy to combat climate change poses new challenges to our international regulatory frameworks. More power plants would need to be safeguarded, some of them possibly in war zones, as we already see in Ukraine. More technical experts and engineers would be needed at a time when fewer and fewer are actually enrolling in nuclear university programs. New emerging technologies, such as suicide drones, would need to be guarded against. And all parts of the nuclear fuel supply chain is very likely to undergo quite significant change with very possible potential environmental impacts. And with that, I will hand over the rest of the presentation to Itfa.
Thank you, Johannes. So I will cover the changing supply chain risks that tripling global nuclear energy will significantly impact the entire supply chain. Global uranium consumption is projected to reach 100,000 metric tons annually by 2040. That's driving rising prices that are already reviving mining operations worldwide. For comparison, about 60,000 tons is required today for 410 reactors that are currently online. So importantly, we must consider the disproportionate effects of uranium mining on indigenous and other marginalized communities whose voices have often been excluded from the nuclear discourse. And it is also key to consider the geopolitics of procurement in the events of disruptions, as seen in the Ukraine war and 2023 coup in Niger. Next slide, please. So another major challenge accompanying increased nuclear energy production is the management of nuclear radioactive waste. From 1954 to 2016, approximately 390,000 tons of spent fuel was generated. So a tripling of nuclear energy will put immense pressure on developing effective storage and reprocessing solutions as well. So rising uranium prices will also impact the economic feasibility of both waste management and uranium fuel reprocessing. The spent uranium lowers overall waste, but also introduces more opportunities for diversion of fuel and thus the nuclear proliferation. Turning to proliferation risks, SIPRI has reported that all nuclear weapon states are modernizing and expanding their nuclear arsenals as well. While civilian nuclear energy plants are generally considered lower proliferation risks, the potential misuse of the civilian nuclear fuel cycle for weapons development remains a concern, especially if arms race dynamics lead some states to revisit their NPT commitments. Next slide, please. Next, we come the policy recommendations, and considering the challenges that I and Johannes discussed, we recommend some of the policy recommendations. One, that we need to enhance the enrichment and reprocessing technology safeguards to prevent proliferation and consider the environmental and humanitarian impacts. And also, we need to recognize fuel enrichment and reprocessing as significant proliferation risk and explore the alternative options. There, we need to also supply chain awareness, and we need to pay attention to the humanitarian and environmental impacts throughout the nuclear supply chain, from uranium mining to spent nuclear fuel disposal. And we urgently need to pursue safe and sustainable solutions for nuclear spent fuel disposal and long-term storage. Then comes the humanitarian impact assessment. We recognize the environmental implications of a substantial increase in nuclear reactors, which may also heighten the risk of nuclear accidents. Next comes the increased funding and security. We need to increase funding for safeguards and enhance physical security of nuclear facilities in order to prepare them for climate change related natural disasters. Then we need to specifically pay attention to training and research funding, where we need to ensure adequate training and resources for the next generation of nuclear professionals, with increased funding for research and education. Also, we need to engage youth and the public and focus on educational opportunities for them, particularly women and underrepresented groups, and address barriers to entry in the nuclear field. And we also need to adapt to emerging challenges and acknowledge the new nuclear technologies will present unique security challenges, and they require updated safeguard measures. And finally, we need to prepare for supply chain disruptions and plan for potential energy security impacts from disruptions in the uranium supply chain due to conflicts, natural disasters, or other crises. Next, please. To conclude, while nuclear energy presents potential benefits in addressing the climate crisis, it also brings significant risks that must be carefully managed. And so a comprehensive approach is needed to balance these complexities as we look toward a sustainable energy future. So thank you so much. And we also thank our other group members who were unable to join due to other commitments. for putting in their valuable contribution in the entire report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Focus Group 4. That was another excellent presentation, and of course, it's important to thank all of the Policy Cycle members who also can't be here today, as everybody is so busy in their early career stages and across many different time zones. But I think it's also very important that we had a big discussion there about nuclear energy, as it's something that I think is not discussed anywhere near enough in the public debates, and the implications it has for security, particularly as we see in Ukraine at the moment. We've been shown in real time just the impact of having a nuclear reactor on a battlefield, what it could have. So it's a really important and timely addition to the discussion. And I think, as you can all see throughout this, that we have so much expertise and talent amongst CVN, and they very much gave me a lot of material to work with for the policy report. So thank you all very much. I think that they very much made the report as powerful as it is. So with that, we now have about just under 25 minutes left. So thank you everybody for some good timekeeping as well. We have time for some questions and answers. So as you'll see in the Zoom, we have a Q&A function. So we would really appreciate it if you submitted questions that you have to us through that. I also had a couple of questions sent to me before this by people who couldn't make it. And the first question that I wanted to bring into it, because I felt it was the most relevant to discussions and across all of the themes that we had today, was and it was a general question to all the policy cycle members. What role could interconnecting existential threats and making these interconnections clear play in helping to mitigate adversarial situations and adversarial relationships in international relations, and could they be the key to moving past some of the rivalries and contests that we see in global politics? So if I open up to the floor for anybody to step forwards if you have something to say to that question.
Declan, just to rephrase the question, would you say it's how can EVN help overcome adversarial relationships, or between states or institutions, or?
So I read it as between states. I believe it wasn't specific on that, but I believe it was. I interpreted it as between states in international relations and global politics.
Well, I think what immediately comes to mind is of course just the networking effects, the connections between policy professionals in different countries across these adversarial relationships or borders, that there are people that know each other directly. This is how the Americans and the Soviets back in the day, right, had these technical level experts that were engaging even when the politics they would not work. But when you have these direct conversations steady in the background, when finally there is some momentum or there is an opportunity, you already have those channels open, basically.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point about the possibilities of networking, and whether that's between borders and different fields. I think it's a really important point to make. And with that, I see Halima has a hand raised, so I'll hand over to Halima.
Yeah, thank you, Declan. And I kind of, I would look at the question from a slightly different framework, perhaps. Let's say once we are talking about the interlinkages between different threats, and if we just pick on, let's say, climate change threats, threats related to climate change, and then the nuclear risks, associated with either nuclear weapons use or perhaps even some sort of an accident that leads to radiological contamination. So these are the kind of threats that are that would have long-term effect for humanity. It won't be just one state or one particular group of states affected by it. Like nuclear weapons use or an accident at one place would likely affect a region or perhaps the whole planet as such. So that's one point. The other issue that relates to how do we overcome the adversarial relationships, or how do we address that aspect and then address these interlinked threats. So perhaps one of the things that states need to kind of reconsider is that they need to come out of that Cold War mentality of or Cold War mindset, perhaps, in thinking in terms of zero sums, and also having kind of a binary worldview, perhaps. So if that thinking is kind of reshaped and states reconsider that climate change is not affecting just one state or 3 states or 10 states, it affects the whole world, it affects all the states. Yes, some states are affected more than others, but then there needs to be collective effort to address this. So perhaps I would kind of recommend that, or perhaps think in those terms, if that old mindset can be changed in terms of coming up with new solutions to these problems.
Yeah, thank you very much, Halima. That was an excellent answer. So I'll pass on next to Nivi.
Thank you, Declan. I think just in terms of the process itself, by just thinking about the fact that they are interlinkages, just recognizing that they are interlinkages, I think that already opens up perspectives and opens up the mind to realizing that it's not just one single problem, it's more problems, but they're all interconnected and you're not alone. There is this sense of collectiveness that comes in, and I think that automatically will go some way towards reducing the adversarial nature of these relationships, as long as you realize I'm not alone. It's not just me. I'm not the one facing the biggest problem, because there are other problems and everyone else is facing it and they're all facing it in different ways. So I think just the very nature of understanding and accepting, first of all, that there are interlinkages, and then studying them even more, I think will go some way towards helping elevate these adversarial nature of these relationships.
Yes, thank you, Nivi. I think that's great advice for a healthier international mindset around interconnectedness. And I'll hand over then to Shaza.
Thank you. I would be taking along the point that Halima mentioned regarding changing the perspective. There's a really good book on it, which is Stronger by Ryan Hess, where he lays out the perspective that US and China would be stronger if they collaborate with each other on numerous issues that are of global nature. So when we look at it through the lens of emerging technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, I think this is one of the areas where both of the superpowers, or in fact all of the states, can benefit a lot by collaborating with each other. So it's a matter of perspective of how you're looking at those. And yes, the point that Nivi mentioned, that the problem is there and the existential risks, they are interconnected. So to to solve them, I think the collaboration between the major powers and the rest of the world, the concerned stakeholders, is the key. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was a really strong set of answers, and I think it's great to see that this theme of interconnectedness between threats carries very much over to the interconnectedness between states, and that there is a good understanding amongst us that this is the case, and that we need to get this point across to state leaders and policymakers. And with that, I will pass on. So we have a couple of questions in the chat now. So we have a first question from Michelle Houghton, who works with us at Basic, and this is for everybody. So given more time, are there any areas you would have liked to research more, and/or has taking part impacted your day-to-day work, or work you would like to do in the future? So again, I will open it up to the floor to answer if you wish. And Nivi, I'll hand the floor to you.
Thank you, Declan. I think, as you would have noticed from our group's discussion, that we were really trying to map out stakeholders, but unfortunately, due to the timing, we didn't succeed. You would have seen a very early iteration of the map as part of the report in the annex, which looks nothing like what Focus Group 3, I think, did. But in any case, I think that's one thing that we would like to work on even more, to really truly use the Kumu methodology and map out all of the different stakeholders, the hierarchies, the different communities, and really build on that work. So I think that's one thing that we would like to do.
Yeah, that's great, Nivi. We had a workshop with our colleague at Basic, Chris Spedding, who showed everybody how to use Kumu. He's a real Kumu wizard and has worked with Horizon 2045 on making maps. And we spent one workshop on it. So I think, yeah, we're looking to do a more in-depth work with mapping actually this year for one of our EVN initiatives. So keep your eyes out for that, because I think one workshop was a good start, but we can definitely do a lot more on that in the future. And I'll hand over to Fatima next.
So with respect to other areas that we would like to do research and focus our research on it, well, we actually discussed about this, the other research areas in our group, but we just touched it. We didn't go deep into it. And that was the joint nuclear programs, for example, the joint uranium enrichment facilities. And because I'm also working for the UNIDIR at the WMD Free Zone in Middle East, this is one of the initiatives that has been proposed. That's one of the solutions that the zone in the Middle East can be based on, is that to establishing a joint uranium enrichment facilities that is being shared and run by all of the countries in the region. So it has some advantages and disadvantages in terms of security. For example, it's easier for international organization to do the monitoring and verification and stuff, because the joint nuclear program is a joint uranium enrichment facilities is not run by only one country. So it makes the access more easier for example, the agency. But what is unknown is the security implication, and also the threats and also the risk that it can bring with it. So if you ask me what are the other research areas that I would like to delve into, I would say that the joint nuclear programs.
Thank you very much, Fatima. And I think we get the sense from these answers that it very much feels like, you know, we've started something here with these exploring these interconnections and stepping into other fields, but it's very much just a start, and there's plenty more to be done with these further explorations. So thank you very much for that answer. And Johannes, I can see that you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I can add one thing that would have been interesting to explore further. So obviously the report itself came out during the summer, but the world doesn't stop and things keep happening. But in the last few months, of course, there's been action in the US to ban uranium imports from Russia. And on the other side of it, Putin has been talking about putting in place export restrictions on uranium. So this has really highlighted just what a significant chunk of the uranium supply chain that goes through either Russia or Kazakhstan, and what this might mean for supply chain security in the coming years and decades. So that would have been an interesting angle to go further into.
Yeah, thank you, Johannes. Yes, that has massive implications for the future of the field and the future of nuclear energy, nuclear materials. And yeah, we constantly, this field, things, I mean, it feels very much so things are coming even thicker and faster throughout the field. So it's very important that we keep this type of research going. So with, if nobody else has anything to answer for that question, we have another question from the audience, which may, depending on how long we go through it, may be our last one. So it's from Sumara Akram. So, hi, thank you for enriching discussion on nuclear arms, race and disarmament. My question is about artificial intelligence impact on nuclear weapons. So it has been argued that by many scholars in IR that AI upholds the continuation of historical cultural clash of civilizations based on colonial ideologies of race, class, gender, and religious construction, and transportation of identities over states. Does that mean nuclear weapons constituting AI expands adversarial nature of epistemological gaps between the global south and the global north countries? So again, I'll open that up to the floor, and we will see who wants to tackle that question. So Ian, thank you very much.
Oh yeah, that's a very interesting question. Like, it's very nuanced, and I like how the question was made to include the exclusionary nature of nuclear weapons, the coloniality of nuclear weapons. So it's I don't think there is actually a simple way to answer this, because it's a very, very, very complicated question that the person posed. But all I can say is I do agree with you that AI and its relations to colonial history and disparities, there is something there. I actually want to look more into this question, and hopefully I can give you a better answer, like in longer detail.
Yes, thank you. It's a very big and complicated question as well. So it's it definitely adds a lot to the discussion on this. And I wonder if the part of it that I might ask to focus on in particular is this link, I guess, between AI and some of the colonial and kind of gender-based kind of ideologies that have been in the field. Do we have potential for AI to tackle this, or can it be an issue that reinforces these problems? So Halima, yes, thank you for raising your hand.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so first, wow, Sumera, like this is one tough question to answer. I mean, like even just like I'll just give you like kind of a snapshot of an answer right now, but this needs a kind of really deep thinking before you can answer it. So let me like try to give you that snapshot. Okay, so and before I do that, one thing that you should do is look for the report of the policy cycle of 2023, and you would find number of focus groups. In fact, we had working groups then, number of working groups tackling this issue. One of them addressed it directly, the others perhaps indirectly, or in parts of their reports would had referred to this particular aspect, not perhaps in context of AI, but the coloniality related to nuclear weapons possession, or perhaps saying it in other words, that like 3 out of 5 nuclear weapon states as recognized by NPT were or had some sort of a colonial identity attached to them. So there you go. And then the way the post-World War II international liberal order was established, and the way international law works, there are several scholars who have talked about it from a post-colonial lens. So perhaps that's one way to look at this, right? Okay, so specifically on the issue of AI and the intersection of AI and nuclear weapons. So that would depend on whether there is an AI integration with nuclear command control systems, whether there is some sort of decision-making or nuclear processes that involve AI-based systems, and whether those AI-based systems are biased or prejudiced, or have those colonial, let's say, for the choice of a better word, colonial mindset or colonial way of looking at different states or even different civilizations. And here you can bring in that argument of clash of civilizations, right? Which kind of, I know that it has been addressed in several, or perhaps critiqued in other ways. So perhaps that's one way to kind of look at how AI would be kind of perpetuating that same colonial rule or colonial, let's say, mindset into a decision-making process which ideally should not be looking into or should not be based on those prejudices or those biases. And with regards to the epistemological gaps, that's, again, a very, very complex thing to answer. I'll not try to even attempt to answer it. But yeah, but I think this is a brilliant, brilliant question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Aleem. I think you gave a, there was a really good answer, and a lot of detail and thought went into that. And it's great that not only people with, say, AI kind of background, talking this issue, but also having somebody with a nuclear law background as well, hearing that perspective on it as well, because both would likely, I would imagine, be equally as important as to try to mitigate such an issue of what goes into the programming of these systems. So yes, thank you very much. And Shaza, I will pass on to you.
Thank you. Again, a very tough question, but I would just like to add a point. Again, that's a very tough question to handle, but while we're looking backwards, thinking about how the interplay between colonialism and nuclear world, I think one of the major takeaway of this policy cycle, like I observed it in my group, is to think on how artificial intelligence is going to take us forward. And it opens up new dimensions into looking how it's going to impact the global north and the global south. We call it the leapfrog technologies. Okay, so now we need to see how this leapfrog technology going to impact the different dynamics and the existing power dynamics between the global north and global south. This is one of the areas that I really love to work upon. And sorry for being too much interested in AI, but again, this is one of the things that we should look into, that how it's going to impact the existing power dynamics between the global south and global north while taking into account the nuclear factor. Thank you. That would be from my side.
Yes, thank you, Shaza. And I think that the question was so broad that there was absolutely room to take those different focuses on it, because it covers on so many issues. So thank you very much, Samaria, for that question. I think that what you have there is potentially a very, very interesting article, because I think you could spend a lot of time delving into that, or maybe I don't know, maybe even a PhD thesis or something, because there's a lot to unpack in there and explore. But with that, we are just about out of time, so I'm going to wrap up the event here. I just want to thank everybody again for all the policy cycle members for all the hard work that they put in throughout, and made it. I had a really enjoyable time working on it with you all, and gave me plenty of material for the reports, and also for everybody who's participated today and spoken. I think it's been a really, really invigorating and timely conversation from everybody. I'd also like to again thank Sara for an excellent keynote speech, and Ploughshares for their continued support for the EVN and for BASIC, and for many other field building exercises throughout the nuclear and security fields. We very much will be continuing down this line, the phase 3 of this policy cycle. We certainly don't feel like that this is still very much the beginning of this type of work. And we very much hope that some of you can join us on this work over the next year. So just a reminder again that the Original Voices Network, whether you're a current member or somebody looking to join, or that you know somebody who you think would be an early career expert looking to connect with other people, if you have somebody to recommend, we are open at the moment for new membership until the end of the month. So I just want to say again to everybody, thank you very much for everybody for joining this event today. The audience for sticking around for whatever time zone that you're in. Some people, but maybe here at crazy hours. It's really appreciated, the support, and we had a very quite a broad spectrum of expertise and seniority actually amongst the attendees as well, which is really interesting. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. I really look forward to continuing this work in the future with you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you.